Welcome back to another edition of the Deep Cover Podcast. I'm your host, Omar Zaran. Thank you, as always, for joining me for another edition of the pod. If you've been listening recently, I have had two big goals for this year. And the one goal was to kind of branch out into more real life topics that kind of relate to sports. And the second is to get a wider array of guests on here. I've been super proud of the fact we've had a number of women on here before, up until of these past few weeks. So I'm happy to continue that trajectory with Kalli Ringelberg. Kalli, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Thank you. Happy to be here.
So Kalli is somebody I recently started following, and in addition to providing some engaging and interesting content, she also is a Canadian, which is why she's on the pod today. Unless you've been living under a rock and you're living in the United States or Canada, you know that our countries are not doing too great right now in the grand scheme of things in terms of their relations. And so I kind of want to bring Kalli on for a Canadian perspective. And it really all starts, and my interest in this started when I saw the U.S. anthem being booed at NHL, NBA, MLS games. Obviously, there's a lot of Canadian cities that have teams in leagues that are predominantly American. So, and I'm assuming we're starting to see it in MLB with Blue Jays games as well. So, Kalli, to start this off, when you started to see the boos happening for the U.S. national anthem, but two, the tremendous uproar of cheers when "O Canada" was played, I guess, what was your initial reaction to the whole thing?
So I'm glad you bring up both sides of it, because to be honest, I'm kind of a no booing. I hate it. It's not a thing I've ever really liked at games. I go to so many live games. I don't like yelling at refs. I don't like booing in particular for calls, things like that, because I think things happen. And it's a topic of conversation with my family, with a lot of people, of like, do we agree with it? Do we not? And I just want to preface this by saying, I understand why it's happening. And I think that's like the key thing. I don't want to like tone police people who are reacting and expressing themselves in arguably like a nonviolent way. I think if the arenas, or if everything was better shaped or would enable it, I would recommend taking a knee. We know that has a similar effect. I don't love that it's booing like the singers that are putting in effort and performers, of course, but the biggest one that made a lot of sense for me was the Four Nations, mainly because there was obviously, that's a representation of the athletes that are going for Canada versus like a Canadian team that happens to have both, or vice versa. So, and I think there was a lot of sort of behind the scenes conversations with the Kachuk brothers that we have our own issues like this. So there was a lot of tension, and it was very clearly like at the height of that. So that I understood. Again, it's the conversation goes a lot back and forth with my family, with people who are, adamant about like, well, it's horrible. That doesn't represent us. We're not the booers. We're not the people that are negative to that as Canadians. And that's true. I think there's a lot of Canadians that feel that it's not a very good representation of who we are, because it's like my initial reaction to other booing situations. It's kind of a poor sport. With that said, there is a sovereignty that's being challenged, and it sort of creates a bigger conversation about when you're I don't want to say victim, because there's a lot of people still in Canada that are in very privileged positions. But when you are not the aggressor, it feels like you do what you can and you react how you can. And as I said, this is a nonviolent way. I think there are way worse ways to react. And so I'm kind of, I'm torn by how I feel about it. But on the flip side, you did mention the positive. That's going louder, cheering. That's kind of always been our thing, though. Like it's coming out a lot, and it's bringing a lot of Canadians together that did have, we're a diverse group. We're not a monolith either. And as much as I'd love to say we're all great and kind and positive and like all this, like there's a lot of problems in our country as well. And there's bigotry and racism and homophobia and like all of these issues across the board. We're not immune to that. And I certainly think we try to be as accountable, well, I do, as possible. But the positive side, as in the really feeling it reverberate through us when the anthem was being sang, was certainly the true north, which always happens, and strong and free. And that was like the big point, the sort of peak buildup. I'd like to believe everyone feels that with their anthem. I have mixed feelings about the need of an anthem everywhere too. So like I'm kind of all over the place with what that feels like. But it was nice to have everyone come together. We have situation before this where the American anthem, the sound would go out, the Canadians all in the crowd will help sing it at a Canadian game. Like we've actually always been pretty, especially at sporting events, supportive of the teams we're against. We've always, take our hat off. We turn to whatever flag if that's their way of doing it. We've never really pushed this attitude of booing and not accepting it and doing all this. But I mean, when Colin Kaepernick took a knee, like I saw it. I know why you did that. Like I'm in the trenches paying attention to those things too. And the fact that it's getting such a visceral reaction to something that feels very real. It's a shame that people are even looking at the booing as if it's this egregious thing, when to me, where else would you do it? Like it's too bad for the singer, but again, my argument of should anthems be at every sporting event, it goes to show that if you think they should be there, then maybe protesting them will be there too. It's just sort of hand in hand. So yeah.
You touched on a lot there, and there's a few things I kind of wanted to piggyback off of. So when they first started happening, from my perspective, it was. Now I'm with you. We'll get to where anthems belong in sporting events later on, but I was like, okay, I think the first time I saw it was like during a Raptors game, and they were hosting. I think they're playing Atlanta. Was the first time I saw it, and I was like, okay, Georgia, red state, makes sense, right? But as a fan of the Knicks, I was like, all right, we got a game coming up in Toronto pretty soon. I'm kind of curious how they would receive a team from a blue state. Yeah. And I was like, you could really rationalize it either way. You could say, well, they would show that, we're going against the state that voted for them, or we could view Americans as a monolith in that way, right? Mm-hmm. And they went with the monolith, which surprised me a little bit, but I also understood it. And then with the foreign nations, I'll be honest, I feel like the charged situation that it really made that more of a must-see event.
Oh yeah.
Like I'll be completely honest, I'm not super locked in on hockey, but it was on that night. I was like, man, it's US and Canada. I gotta watch it, and you saw it mattered to the Canadian players a lot. It was incredibly evident that they cared about this so much. And when you're talking about a form of protest, again, how else are they going to convey it? And I kind of want to dial in here to just the Canadian atmosphere right now. Yeah. Obviously, a lot of Americans have their own opinions about the Trump administration and the way that all these executive orders are being passed and DEI initiatives are being scrapped. And in my last episode, I had a lengthy conversation about the Jackie Robinson scrubbing of his military duty that eventually got remedied. But so we have a lot of emotions right now, especially, of a certain political leaning. So as Canadians, what is your, I guess, viewpoint on everything that's going on to your neighbors in the South?
Well, again, like we're all different. There's layers, there's levels, right? As you know, and obviously that's the same for in the US. I will say that, so for me personally, I work with predominantly Americans. I work also with law enforcement and military and government in the US. So I have a range of where people fall. I have ways to avoid talking about how I feel. There's an assumption every Canadian, which happens to be true for me, but is extremely progressive and liberal. So you only really hear in these sort of work settings anyone who is very liberal that will talk to me about politics because they just don't want to enter that. But I can tell you right now, like I've heard a lot of commentary that if I were to follow the flags, I would get to the fact that, you know, I know where you stand. So I'm also very ears to the ground. I'm also paying a lot of attention. I lived abroad for many years, so I have a different perspective of Canadians and how the politics happened here. I will tell you that one of the differences that I've noticed since I've been back is when I was living abroad, Canada has such a great reputation, and Trudeau, our prime minister, former prime minister now, had such a great reputation that I was surprised to get to Canada and see that not everyone was very pro. So that's just to say that the people that are in the settings, that are living it day to day, experience things slightly different than what we see. And I know now from having that range of experiences with people, whether it's through threads or through sports or through work or through everything in the US, that some people are actually not fully aware. I also work in marketing and media, so I understand there's been a lot of manipulation and disinformation. I think it's everywhere. We look at it when there's a situation like Israel, Gaza, what's happening, that we're so far away from it, that the information is so disseminated and so potentially ill received by some groups, and there's a lot that we don't have full access to. So the environment here, from my perspective, from a hopefully not horribly closed off echo chamber, is that this has brought us a lot closer together. For preface, I live in Quebec, which is very pro Quebec. So it's very interesting to see it become pro Canada. But it's like buying Canadian has always been at the forefront for Quebec. It's buying Quebec, it's buying in like local, but it's always been huge. So that change was actually not very jarring or dramatic for any of us. The funny thing was we saw maple leafs instead of the fleur de lis, which is the Quebec flag.
Yeah.
But in terms of not buying American or from the US, not a huge thing. I feel like people are tired and everybody's scared and the one thing I will say that was the most interesting thing was, okay, I'm obviously I'm a feminist. I support the way intersectionality as well. And this was such an interesting exercise of intersectionality in the sense that some of the responses of Canadians or of Americans versus each other is kind of what happens when you have conversations with like gender divide or color division or conversations like that, which is like, why are you holding like one group of Americans bad form and bad reaction against all of us? And it's like, it was a very like not all American. The same way they'd react to not all men, same way not all, you know. So it was kind of, it's like been an exercise in my brain capacity of trying to find how to talk to people. I think a big thing for me was to be very conscious of the fact that Black women in particular, 92% is like an insane amount of people that have come together to say we don't want this. And I have said it more than once, being in the WNBA world and following sports as closely as I do, in particular in basketball. You got to listen to Black women and just to see that group of people come together and say, you know what, we don't want this. And to really, like, I work, my company's headquarters in Atlanta. I went to Atlanta and I knew walking around that statistically every Black woman I saw did not want this. Like that's how it is, right? You see white people, you don't know their perspective, but it's a bit of a 50-50 depending on how you move into the numbers. But I was looking at every Black woman here and I was like, I can confidently say that I would be safe with my mindset with you, and because I don't have to guess. And I would love to feel that way with Canadians. I would love to say that we're all of a sudden like super liberal, super progressive. All of us are like, no, this is not the Canadian way. But that's never been the case. And we have to give some grace to Americans as a whole, because some of my best friends are American. They live in the US. I actually have an abundance of friends that live across the border. Either they are Canadian or they are directly like from the US. And they're some of the best people I know in the world. And do I think they would think this way? No, of course not. I don't, but I also work around a lot of well-intended people that make the joke about the 51st state. And you'd be surprised how often it happens. And when I say you'd be surprised, I'm not being funny. I'm saying that you probably would, because every coworker of mine that's American, that I've told them that this happens all the time, until I enter the room, they do not realize how common it is. I would literally went to a dinner, met new people, and lo and behold, right when they found out I was from Canada, oh, you're going to be our 51st state. And it happens all the time. And you don't really know unless you go through that. And again, the parallel of microaggressions, every woman knows what I call is like a Schrodinger's joke. You assess and see, you put it out there and you see how someone's going to react. And if someone reacts fine, then you were serious. If someone reacts badly, oh, it was just a joke, you can't take a joke. I'm hoping that the majority of Americans realize that it's not funny. It's I don't want to be like extreme, but it's kind of threatening our sovereignty.
Well, it reminds me so much. So I'm half Palestinian, and I lived in Jordan in the early 2000s. So I lived in a country that bordered Iraq when the U.S. invaded Iraq. And when I came back in 2005 to the States, I heard those similar type of jokes, right? We're like, oh, we're going to liberate this country or that country and whatever, and we're going to make them the 51st state. And it's always been so weird to me, because why are we using imperialism as a joke, and
Right.
and I
It's
again as
behavior, like it is like
right.
that assumption that you're going to make it better purely because, like, don't worry, you're under our wing. Like I don't know about your situation in particular, but for me, seeing the treatment of women, I'm like, do you think Canadian women are going to be anything but a second-class citizen? Not sure, because I also know how they treat Puerto Ricans in the US. And that to me is one of the best potential proof of what you would think a 51st state of Canadians would look like. Not to mention, we have a lot of immigrants. They're not safe under this. And that's something that's very personal to me. Like, look, I'm going to be safe. I'm the quote unquote people you want there, because I never get questioned or talked to this way. I go through the border all the time. I never get talked to this way. But there are people that we've taken that I strongly believe deserve a home in a safe space, that I don't think they're as safe if that were to happen. So when it's threatening my sovereignty, it's threatening the people that we as Canadians said, we have land that can be home to you. And there's no proof that that is what's going to happen on the other side. There has been no proof for me that going to the US or doing anything like that would improve the situation for Black Canadians, for Indigenous Canadians, for anyone that, and this isn't to other, but I do understand that there is a privileged position from someone, and don't get me wrong, I know a few Canadians who think this way, that have made flippant comments about, it would make my life easier because then I don't have to have 2 addresses. And it's very like flippant, and you're not really thinking straight of what it's actually going to do to people. With that said, I would really encourage Americans to, because I've seen this all over threads, and I feel for you, but there's this like, why are Canadians being so mean? And so whatever. And the funny thing is, like, the proof is in your comments. The moment you put that out there, There are 10 Americans that are going, they just wish they were us. Don't worry, they're going to be us. So use that energy for them. Like we're not ever going to attack you or take it. And like I would say this to white people going into black people's messaging, to brown people, to use that energy then to call out the other people, because they're the ones that are fortifying this situation. Because when you invite Andrew Tate to the White House and you invite those scum of the earth type people, and there's a group of people, whether they're tiny or not, it's bigger than our whole entire population. Like that's perspective. There's, even if it's like, they're like, well, it was only, 48.5% of people wanted this. That is such a chunk of people. That is so many people. And yes, the grand scheme of the rest of the world who is paying attention, maybe it's not that much, but you got to vote and we didn't. So that's a really big group of people. And I'm so big on, you need to exercise your right to vote. So apathy doesn't sit well with me either. So I understand that there are people that also didn't vote, that they can fall in wherever. But those people they're not a problem. They created a problem too. When I fight for your right to vote, I also fight for your right to not vote. However, when you say like it's only 48 point whatever, it got to those numbers. That's of voters. It got to those numbers because you didn't like someone's laugh, because you didn't like that she wore pearls, or that she was very, because you joined your voice to that. Like, I'm sorry, but that's what happened. You joined your voice to a group that said, like, I don't know if Americans, or sorry, people from the US, because I understand we're a continent together, but for the sake of it, Americans understand the impact that some of these choices, but also comments have happened. Like when Hillary lost, I cried. Like I was like, and I'm not saying she was the best representation of women or of educated women or of whatever version of boxes you want to put her in.
You bring that up, and it reminds me of my experience on election night that night. And I was watching all the coverage, and it became abundantly clear what was about to happen. So I was like, you know what, let me go get a drink. And I went to a bar where a friend of mine was hosting karaoke that night, and some guy was at the bar talking, and he had voted for Trump, and he was super excited and all this stuff, and he was talking about like his sports team had won a championship in a way. And I often equate a lot of the hardcore Trump followers to sports fans, because it's a blind loyalty thing where it doesn't matter what he says, you're just going to take it as gospel. You're going to twist it around to make it fit whatever makes sense to you. And I think a lot of this that we've seen is, as it pertains to Canada and the whole concept, is a lot of people have this like American exceptionalism idea, right? Where it's like, well, why wouldn't you want to be a part of America? We're awesome. And then it's just like, listen, man, you're not awesome. Like, there's so much that isn't awesome about this country right now.
To your point, not everyone means it as an insult.
Right. Yeah.
But there's a dissonance there. And so you brought up like being from Palestine. I was at, this is where it hit me, and I'm not saying it didn't hit me beforehand, but this is where I was with work people, and they were from the US, and I'm not going to throw anyone under the bus, because to be honest, it felt like one of those, I don't think anyone really believes this here. They're just saying it to sound cool. But we happened to go to this incredibly inclusive restaurant, and they had a beer from Palestine. And so they were like, oh, we have to get this, And then someone to the American, like these are two Americans having a conversation, turned and said, well, have it now, because it might be your last chance. And then on the flip side, and you're like, okay, doom and gloom. And then someone goes, or not, or you're just going to own this beer. And when I tell you that I've never felt so close to the Hunger Games and living in the capital, that I just was like, no, this is ick. This is gross. You can't talk about, I understand no one was around, no one was whatever, but this is the conversations that happen, that are flippant, that are seen as harmless, that if we don't address, we're complicit, because I was just there. Like I was just at that same table, and it's, What am I supposed to do? Flip the table and get mad? This is where a lot of people don't recognize that their privilege is to stay quiet during microaggressions like this. And yeah, would it have helped anyone? No, but I can tell you right now that one of the most significant things you can do is not laugh. Like, that's one of the things. Like, yes, for your own, because it's not funny. But when it just hits them that you're not going along with what they're saying, and like, I sort of turned and was just like, okay, we're not going to do that, and sometimes it does not have to be aggressive. This is my like version of a boo where I'm just like, I maybe should have just turned and started booing at the table and just boo you. Like, that was terrible. But I can tell you that when you are in a privileged position like myself, and where I usually find myself, I don't think people realize how close you are to people who make comments like this, as in close vicinity. Like, I'm not saying woe is me or poor me. I'm saying we need to take on a version of responsibility that says, not only are we allowed in these rooms, I can tell you right now, I'm allowed in the room as long as I shut up and put up with it. That's true. So I need to find a way to navigate those situations, because at least I'm allowed in the room. So how do I navigate those conversations in a way that feels like, is this a informative moment? Is this someone who actually is probably open to a conversation on why this is bad? And a few people are. Or is this one of those situations where you got to just shame them and say, not today, and hope that they take something away with it? Because we're in a state where division is beneficial to the people that are causing these problems. And my goal is that the people who are directly impacted in these situations, and I'm not saying I'm directly impacted in the sense that I feel for everyone, but for the most part, I'm pretty privileged and protected and things like that. I'm a woman, so I can still feel close enough to it, but there are ways to navigate the world that's right now a little bit easier for me. What do I need to do when these conversations happen around me? Because they do. I wish they didn't. I love when people get scared to talk about them from it. Like, I see their face correcting themselves in real time when they're like, no, I don't mean, I mean, when whatever. And it's sort of like, you're going to keep talking. That means that I've made myself clear enough that this is not a safe space for bigotry. This is not a safe space for that kind of, I do not need to tolerate your intolerance. That's it. I'm a nice person. I'm empathetic. I can explain and talk to you if you're willing to discuss things, but I'm not training 30, 40, 50-year-olds on how to address people. Bringing it back to sports, I've been at events. You think sports are safe until you talk about women's sports. And then all of a sudden, like, I'm a Flyers fan. Like, I'm not even, like, I go through crap as an NHL big hockey town here, and I'm not a Habs fan. I'm a Flyers fan, and I have been for years and years and years and years. Believe me, I can, elbows up.
Well, how did that happen, Kalli? I'm kind of curious.
So long story short, my dad's a big Habs fan. I moved and grew up in Portugal. So when I was coming back to Montreal for university, my dad was like, it's in the bag. She loves hockey. She's going to be a Habs fan. But I'm also a really strong-headed middle child. So he was like, I can't tell her what she should choose. I got to let her find her way. So he, of course, makes the mistake of going, Kalli, do your own research, find the team you want. He's like, there's no way. She's in Montreal. It is going to be the Habs, and I don't even have to do anything. My dad I have matching sweatshirts. Like, we're in this. And then I can tell you, one night I was at a bar, they had several screens showing, Wings night, like everything, drinking beer. And I go, whatever that team is, because I see them do what looks like a flying V. And I'm a big Mighty Ducks fan. And I was like, you know what? That's borderline impossible, but I need to know what that team is. And then I'm a big Dragon fan. So I see the big sort of wing looking thing. It's orange, which I love. And at the time, when I started following them, they were tied with Chicago for the most Canadian players. They had 16 Canadian players at the time. So I did not feel like I was going against my Canadian roots. I loved the players. Some of them turned out to not be great, But as it went on, the weirdest thing happens. You brought up this point. You get oddly patriotic, or whatever you want to call it, when you're not in the place where that's the norm. So I'm a Flyers fan, and I would get messages from people who don't even watch hockey when they were in the finals and when they were in the playoffs against each other. Haha, your team sucks. Haha. I'm like, you don't even watch sports. But you get oddly like protective of the team because you're constantly having to justify why you support this team. And I will admit it's been harder and harder to justify, not because of them playing bad, but because of problems across the board. But hockey has gotten very hard. Thank God for the PWHL, because men's hockey has become harder and harder to support. Just look how they talk about Coach Jessica Campbell once. In that. Just look at how the conversations around the Pride Night happened. All of those it started with a player from the Flyers. It was embarrassing. It was not okay. And obviously we have scandals, and we had Team Canada hockey team that they found money. I'm not surprised. I grew up around these boys too. And you know what? I need everyone to very quickly get together and say, you need higher standards, because you cannot tell me that these awesome, coveted positions don't also warrant you being a badass good person. In the hockey community was always like, oh, they're so good for the community. They're so good in the community. But apparently, unless you're Black kids, unless you're LGBTQ plus, and again, some of them are amazing about it, but they deserved the attention. Travis Dermott, the players that are actually investing, that are going to Pride Night, that are taking the tape, that are doing these steps. They deserve it. And then when you're in the W, you can't help but be an activist. I'm sorry, WNBA, one of my favorite things about it is how involved they are with the community. And as you know, last year, if you're paying attention, it became a problem. It became a problem with certain players that represented different things, and the emboldening of their fans, not them necessarily. Some, if you're talking about Sophie Cunningham, then maybe sometimes them, but it's I don't want to say like a powder keg, but it is a place that's inviting.
I have an example about that, actually. So as all bad comments arise, this originated from a Facebook post. So I was I was watching a Chicago Sky game, and I think Angel Reese had a really impressive stat line, and I said nice things about Angel Reese, God forbid. And then guy in the comments is like, well, half of her rebounds are off of her own layups. So I was like, you know what? I am going to combat this with information. And I was like, actually, here's where she ranks in defensive rebounding, right? And she is tops in the league in this metric or whatever. And it was silence, and it was just like it became this supercharged moment, which I do think that there is a lot of momentum in the WNBA right now, which is a great thing. And which I've discussed with people on prior episodes, it's a great thing. But there's still, with the league being, I would argue, the most diverse player pool league in the world, in the U.S. sports, I guess, or in North American sports, because you have multiple gender identities, multiple races, obviously. So, and you don't have that in like the NBA, for example. From that perspective, and a lot of people aren't comfortable with it seems, and which is insane to me. It's 2025. I feel like you need to get comfortable with it, right?
But I'm not even comfortable with it. I love it. I'm like,
God embrace it.
Thank you to, I don't even know how to say this. Thank you for showing diverse beauty.
Yes.
Thank you for, I'm tall. I'm about 5'10". But I grew up on an island where the average was maybe around 5 foot. And so I went into basketball immediately, but I was I was post. Obviously, they're like, okay, tallest person on the court, you go and you elbow your way through, and I could throw a ball the whole court, and it was like, okay, kismet, But when I came back to Canada, I was pretty average, low size, so I'd never played like a guard position. So of course now I have no translation to the game and everything like that. And that's totally fine, but I still loved it. But when I see these women 6 foot up, and some obviously aren't, but you see the bodies, the muscle, that this is enabling so many of us to be more comfortable in our own bodies. And I've been asked this before. It's actually fascinating, the conversation of like, why are there so many lesbians in women's sports? And it's like, duh, what do you mean? Like it has nothing to do with gender identity and has everything to do with the fear of appearing quote unquote manly by doing things that make our lives easier. Cutting your hair off when you're playing a sport. Like, it's a very normal thing. Your hair gets in the way. So you just chop it off, and then you have people going, you're a boy, as if it's like not the easiest thing ever to do when you're sweaty and need to shower, like after a workout and things like that. Mm-hmm. Building muscle. That's also something that's like, no, if you're long, you have to look long and svelte and sexy and whatever. You can't look strong. You can't do all this. Lesbians were like, fuck you. For, like, with all due respect, I'm going to go out there and be the best version of myself, and I'm going to knock people down. And if they call me a boy, I'm going to be like, watch what a girl can do. And a few of us went through this battling, like how hard it was on our mental health or our own confidence of what that meant, especially if you're tall, especially if you're bigger and you put on muscle and you do everything. You're like terrified to draw attention to that by also being tough on the court or on the field or anything like that. We're not pushed into it. We're not told. And you know, there's the argument, well, you have to have the right kind of attitude, and that sort of whittles out the people who don't have the right kind of like dog attitude. And it's like, sure, I get what you're saying. We're competitive. But then you have a league that's full of women that beat the crap out of each other when they're playing, because they're tough players and they want that ball and they want to defend their position. And suddenly we're all violent and rough and all that.
That's the funny thing to me about it, because again, as somebody who grew up on the Knicks from the 90s, you know, you get a lot of these fans who would be like, hey, I wish the NBA was more physical. I wish these guys didn't love each other all the time. Like, well, that exists in the WNBA, man. So,
and,
you know,
and
if you want it.
Hate each other, so it's way more interesting. Like,
yeah, 100 times better drama, right?
Well, I mean, it's honestly also the storylines. Like, this is the thing. Like, how is it that we're still going to these, I don't even want to say, they're kind of stereotypical, like, male energy storylines of like the rivalry, because they don't understand how you could make, like, you remember during COVID when there were a few people trying to do these positive, I think John Krasinski or something had like a Good Morning show or whatever it was that was like super positive, super whatever. And then it was bought, and then they sort of squashed it. And it was like, well, why don't we have more positive things? Like, I work in marketing. I kind of understand how it works. Unfortunately, we used to say no, you know, no press is bad press, but now it's sort of like bad press is kind of more engagement and like all of these things. If you look at Joe Rogan's, if you look at people, I could tell you that some of these controversial opinions they don't even believe in, but they understand that engagement is always engagement, even if it's everyone hating you on it. And so this idea that we could create a storyline that's based on, like, there are sisters in it, that would be like a good storytelling, like, oh my God, sister versus sister, or lover, former jaded, like all of these things. Like, come on, we've seen through romantasy in books right now how dismissing things that are technically feminine or whatever you want to put them in the box of is wrong. Like, you cannot convince me that blockchain and all of these things are more real than horoscopes are. You cannot, like, but you've decided that crystals are bad and that blockchain, which is killing the environment, by the way, crypto is suddenly real and thoughtful and super important, and everyone should know about it. Because why? Because a man in a suit wore it. Like, come on. Like, this is just because we get involved and get engaged with it doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad thing. We have money now, we have a lot of money, we want to support. But you're going out there, you're seeing people. Harrison Butker makes a statement on where women should be, and his jersey sells out. It sold out before the season started and before he was even guaranteed he was going to be on that team. It sold out by people who are not football fans. It sold out because they go, I like this person's attitude, and they catered to it. And you have an MLB player that says that slurs against LGBTQ plus and against gay men in particular, and his jersey sells out. So you know that there are things outside of the quality of sports or of delivery. Yet when it comes to women and taking advantage of the things outside of what they do in sports, a great representation is Angel Reese, who is, by all means, but every single one of them is like this, by the way. If you look at the WNBA, if you look at a lot of women, we have Haley Wickenheiser, who's a freaking doctor. She's like the world's greatest. Well, she should have been there representing Canada at Four Nations. I don't care what anyone says. Screw Gretzky. She should have been there. Like, she's amazing. And she's like, when did we stop valuing these other things just because women do them? These women have other companies. These women have brand deals that they have to go out themselves to do. They have their own image. Thank God for NIL now, which is really helping them. It's helping us get to know them. But I'm sorry, even Caitlin should also be allowed to be boring and not bring too much to the table and just be a player. Like people say, she should just be allowed to play ball and go play ball and do her thing. We should have that across the board, but not everyone has that luxury. I mean, I look at someone like Cameron Brink and I was like, I'm so glad you're here, but you could have been anywhere. Like, she would have succeeded. Like Rakia Jackson, like they're beautiful women. They could have been anywhere, and they came to the W because they believed they wanted to play. And like, we sit here and we get to watch Chelsea Gray and her insane passes, and you understand the annoyance of people who have been here for years trying to support this league. Diana was and always will be one of my favorite players. I flew to Phoenix. That is really far for me. I flew all the way to Phoenix in the freaking summer. It was horrible just to see her play. And thankfully, we're getting a Toronto team. I am so excited for that because it's only a 6-hour drive. So I get to go there and try to go and support. But we've been here. And then we have to hear stuff, to your point, talking about Angel Reese, talking about these players. And instead of someone having a degree of humility and saying something like, you know what, I didn't even know there was a league. Can you tell me more? Or can you do something? We don't, like, there's so much dismissal of the information we already have. If you don't, like, why are you here? Like, why are you talking? Like, even the conversation, like, I appreciate that you gave stats and showed up, but you know what? She could also just be your favorite player.
Right.
Like, we talked about identifying with your team or with something like that. Like, I mean, Diana was one of my favorite players. She's a jerk sometimes. Like, I stand by. I know what that looks like. I know what it looks like to just want to root for your players. I mean, Kat Copper is one of my favorite ever players as well. And she has an attitude, and I love it for her. I love that. But why are some people allowed to have it and some people not? And, you know, full circle back to this sort of tone policing that we talked about with booing the anthem and with everything like that, that it's like, you just didn't like how these women came out and represented themselves. And a lot of times they've spoken up about things in a way that has brought attention to people, but hasn't surprised anyone paying attention. Like, Maya Moore left to support a bigger cause than her, and she was one of the best players ever to ever play. when Tasha Cloud had to left for the right, she's one of the people that I have literally gone through my life being like, I hope she'll be proud of me, because just stand on business. And these are women of God. These are women that follow, that thank God, that go through this. So these are, by your standards, I happen to not be religious in that sense, but by their standards, these are the righteous, the right same kind of people. They're just not the right type of people. So I don't understand. Like, I think we're all very mean to each other. I don't know what's happening. There's a massive division. This Canada-US thing, you know what? If I found out that somewhere in the rich folk, white dudes in Canada, and somewhere in the rich folk, white dudes in the US said, hey guys, you know how we're going to get some chat about US and Canada? Let's fight. I would not be surprised. I would not be surprised if half of this stuff is manufactured in order for us. And I'm not a big on conspiracies, but I see how people are so reactive to each other. A boo is a boo until you identify with the anthem so strongly that you feel like it's a boo to you. And that's the part that I'm urging anyone to, on our side, as in a very left progressive person, to try to use terminology that focuses on systems and on bigger things that are the problem, and use that kind of terminology and say, you know, we're not booing you or Americans, we're booing your government, your whatever is happening, right? And those who are upholding it, that's a good starting point from our end. But recognizing as well that it's very easy to say, yeah, that's not me, so I'm on their side. Like, if we are putting sides out there, like if someone goes like, white women are crazy, I'm like, yeah, I've seen the videos. They are. Like, I don't know what to tell you. I'm not, but you don't know that. You don't know me. You don't know that I'm not going to turn around and maybe have the exact same attitude. And until you do, it's my place to differentiate myself and be like, you know what? I'm going to sit here long enough for you to know this is a safe space. Or we're on Facebook or Threads or LinkedIn and we have a moment of representation of ourselves. Get out of the conversation then. Like, don't comment, don't engage. Something's happening. Something's happening in Canada. Something's happening in the US. You guys need a lot of help and support. I get it. But we literally cannot vote for you or do anything or help.
Right.
Like, we're trying.
Just kind of doubling back on the government aspect, kind of want to take this time after that lovely detour we took about the WNBA, which I very much appreciate. I want to talk about the tariff stuff.
Mhm.
And so that, I think, has been Trump's favorite word. In his first administration, his favorite word was China, and now it's tariffs. So, you know, any problem economically that's there, his solution is tariff, tariff, tariff. He's done it with Mexico. He's done it with Canada now. And there have been retaliatory tariffs from Canada as well, which is a really big deal considering, you know, the different things that we get from Canada. So I'm kind of curious from the Canadian perspective. Obviously, you mentioned it's a little bit of a different vibe in Quebec versus Ontario, say. But what has been the reaction to A, American tariffs, and B, Canada's decision to have retaliatory tariffs?
Well, I think we kept hearing, you're right, we kept hearing this word tariff. So a few things happened. We knew it was maybe going to come. We thought maybe it was a threat. The decision was to blanket tariffs, which I think ultimately, look, we're socialists. We're very socialism driven here in Canada. We're, as much as there are obviously a lot of people who are anti-taxes and things like that, we do actually culturally promote putting money into social causes. We do. We have now, you know, reduced childcare. We obviously have what we call like more like tax levied healthcare. Like, a lot of people don't like to say it's free healthcare because obviously we do pay through our taxes. But when I tell you what it feels like to go to the doctor and be like, I just got blood taken out and I didn't have to talk to anyone about a payment or do anything like that, like it's big. These things are great. how did we feel about, we certainly felt a type of way that if you understand how tariffs work, the tariffs are intentionally trying to hurt us in our population. We have very big auto plants here. It's obviously parts. I work for a company that only parts are made in the US versus here where we have both. My company is great. They're able to basically, they've absorbed the tariff so that no one is being like the users and the purchasers of our product. That's a very privileged place to be. It's a great place to be. I appreciate that they're doing this. I love that we're putting out billboards in the US explaining from a Canadian standpoint, like our government is, that's saying, hey guys, tariffs are going to hurt you. Tariffs are necessary. So we do have more tariffs in some areas, like dairy is a big one. And the reason is to cull overproduction. So the US has a lot more people. I recognize that. You have a lot more people to feed, to produce, to do everything like that. But we need to make sure that if we're providing levels of dairy and milk and things to the US, that if they ask us for an amount, that they're never exceeding the amount, that then they won't take. Like, this is where that 200% happens, is it goes, you're not actually being taxed 200% on all of it. You're being taxed on excess because we're having to do more than put it into our communities. In fact, we don't actually take milk from the US. We have our own dairy productions. We also don't want to do what has happened, why there are no eggs right now, is we don't want over farming, over the amount of, it is animal cruelty, and we're also on the side of that kind of excess is too much. Are there things that I don't fully understand about it? Of course, but we have taxes too. We understand that we pay. We have actually paid for a lot of things in excess. I grew up in Portugal, as I mentioned. If you want American, which is also sometimes Canadian products, you pay an exorbitant amount for these products. So if you do want the luxury of peanut butter from here or from the US, you pay $20 for a thing that you would pay for in Canada or the US, right? So I was kind of familiar with the fact that this happens. But Canada, as long as we do not have the population, I understand. We have a lot of farm space. We have a lot of things produced here. What they don't maybe really understand is we're just not going to have certain things. Like, that's kind of where it goes, is we can still have food. We won't die because we have healthcare that will at the very least protect us. We have dairy, we have lumber, which we've always had as a renewable energy. We have water, and we have these necessary things. Yes, we might not get some of the heavily commercialized food that's very fun, that kids love, that we've grown to love as well. We won't have that. But based on the regulations that the US has, that's even worse or freer than ours, we might actually be healthier because of it. Like, there are things that is going to make a difference. We have a lot of snow. We're not going to get all the fruit in the winter if we don't get it from California. I understand. But we're not the ones burning bridges with Mexico, who can provide it. We're opening up conversations with Europe because we're not burning that bridge either. So I worry more about people in the US, that the discrepancy of middle class and obviously lower income, they are not going to have the money to sustain this. I've already seen, we know this, if you're paying attention, fast food, cheaper food, worse for you, worse for your health, but always easier to produce, like, it's nothing. We know this. And don't get me wrong, like, Canada is not perfect in the health industry and regulations and pesticides. Like, all of these things are a problem across the board. If this makes us all reevaluate and look at farmers and look at the land that we have and appreciate it more, amazing. I'd appreciate that. But do not for a second think that this wasn't a control thing. I don't understand, even based on their like, this was the agreed upon treaty 4 years ago when he was in power. Like, I don't understand. This treaty was his. So that's kind of what's throwing me off, is this information is readily and openly out there for anyone to see, that if it's the worst agreements in the world, I mean, he did it for
his agreements. Yeah.
Like, so like some of these things are throwing me off, because everyone seems to have found these arguments to support what he's saying, to support what Elon is putting out there with cuts and things. But was this never a thing 4 years ago? Was this never, like, I don't this, how it's been able to spin the fact that this is positive, but it wasn't positive 4 years ago. Like, I don't really understand. Like, it's too fast. Like, I could understand if we were forgetting something that happened like 20 years ago, but I can't, I don't really get it, because honestly, on our end, one of the biggest grievances with like Trudeau and everything was that he was around during COVID. And that meant that whoever was around during COVID was just going to get torn to shreds. So we're treating it like this just happened, dude. You can't be here. And I actually quite like him. I have my own thoughts on him, but at the same time, I also respect that I'm not the only one in this country. And there was a lack of distrust. But a lot of it was tied together with the fact that of what happened about 4 years ago. So I'm a little bit confused, because there's so much frustration for something.
The interesting thing is, right now there's this growing sense, and so it's two things. So there's this growing sense that Trump at this point is really a figurehead, you know, and that, again, you had a conspiracy theory moment. Here's my conspiracy theory moment, that it's really Elon, the Heritage Foundation, that's kind of running all this. And something I noticed, so I recently finished this book about Elon's takeover at Twitter, and it was called Extremely Hardcore by Zoe Shiver. It's a really good read. And basically everything that he did there is what he's doing now. So the move fast and break things, cut, deal with the consequences later, that is exactly what he did at Twitter. And we've all seen what has become of Twitter, what is becoming of Tesla. And so when I look at it that way, it's just kind of like he's just saying all this stuff, and he only wants to be in office to avoid going to jail. So that's what it comes down to. It's like, oh, this keeps me out of jail. Sick. Let's do it. And okay, I'll be the face of this, and you could be in the Oval and do whatever you want. And I do think there's a growing amount of Americans, that even some that voted for him, that don't like this, right? And they're like, well, what the fuck did I vote for? But it's still not enough. That he still has a decent amount of approval amongst his base. I do want to talk here a bit about national unity, though, because you've brought up Justin Trudeau a lot, and he was quite maligned post COVID and all that, and it's kind of it seems like this, and bring it back to the Anthem booing, it's kind of feels like we're in this moment of Canadian solidarity, more so than I could say I've seen in my 38 years of life. And it's just like I have always looked at Canada's kind of like us. There's a bunch of different people. There isn't like this unified national identity on a lot of things, because running a modern nation is complex. But it seems like we're in that sort of a moment right now. What's your perspective on that?
Well, and I think it's interesting because I grew up in Portugal, I'm very familiar with what like a very strong national identity is. Like, my house was older than Canada is. Like, there's a lot of history there in certain countries in Europe. And I also lived in Holland, and I also lived in Ireland. I've been around places that have these kind of really easy identity markers. And I think as a Canadian, it was always funny, because I never had I always knew why people, like, I was living in Ireland, they're like, you American or are you Canadian? Like, I always kind of got it, because I'm not offended. You don't know. I sound like Vermonters. Like, you don't know where we're from. We're different. We don't have as big a difference maybe provincially than states do. But I get it, like I get it if you're not familiar. We don't have these strong, like we used to have like Canadian culture nights and we're like, what are we going to make? And Quebec has a very strong identity, but like, what is it to be Canadian? And one of the greatest things was when you're abroad, what is it to be Canadian? Every time you're nice or say sorry or do something like overly polite, it's like, oh my God, that's so Canadian of you. And I was like feeding on this. So for me, being Canadian is fueled by that kind of positive outlook on it, where I would just be like, I got to do this more because I'm out here representing what a Canadian is. And if I'm an asshole, I'm going to be, oh, Canadians are assholes. I thought you guys were nice. So I knew that was kind of happening with or without my consent. So here it wasn't necessarily Trudeau. Like we had, things happen. So we had what we called the Freedom Convoy. We had that here. It was it was very divisive. It was incredibly divisive, whether it was supported by an American or not, whether it was the attitude that came from there. One or two flags that should have been burnt a long time ago showed up at these freedom fighting, protesting, whatever you want to call it, that's parking your trucks on the lawn of a very populated place by Parliament that is loud and disruptive and then attacking people around you. We all know how even well-intended protests can turn into bad things. This was where we became a little embarrassed about the Canadian flag. But we don't have the same kind of drive around the US and see an American flag everywhere. We have Canada Day. The best example I was in Ireland and I'm the one Canadian there, and I had my coworker who is American. And literally this is the best demonstration of the difference of our sort of national identity to this. So we Canada Day is July 1st, and let's call it America Day is the 4th of July, right? So they're this, for the impact of it, they're very close together. So we were just setting up to celebrate 4th of July, as one does. She wanted a party. Everyone wanted an excuse to celebrate and support her. And this was on the Friday over the weekend was the 4th. So we're literally on the 1st of July. And she's like, do you guys have one of these days? And I was like, oh yeah, we do. It's Canada Day. And she's like, oh, when is it? And I was like, today.
Yeah.
The difference is there's me helping her get the American flags up, get everything set up for us to celebrate because you wanted this. I was like, it's okay if you don't know. Like, that's totally fine. It's my job to be, happy and excited about my place. I don't need everyone in the world to be. And that was, to me, a very good example of kind of how we have benefited from flowing in between where we want to fit and where we don't want to fit. And that's a lack of identity for some. And sometimes it's just fluidity. It is what it is. But we do have Canadian Indigenous. We do have our Indigenous folk here. So they are very much a representation that we owe them a whole lot of reparations and a whole lot of better things in their life. And they are Canadian, even when I go, oh, whatever, some days I'm not too proud of the flag and not to whatever. There is a large group here of Canadians that are Indigenous to here that have always been and then are not strongly represented. So we have a lot to do, and we try to do that during our Canada Day. This is also something that's happened more and more, is we don't celebrate Canada Day the same way because it's important for us to reflect and to sit on the fact that like we've not been the most welcoming group of people. Like my family's European, so obviously I know that I was at some point an immigrant here, or at least my parents are, and like we all know this. Like we need to do better and we need to be better. However, a threat. It's exactly what I was saying when I become the strongest of a Flyers fan. When you turn around and you say, by no intervention or anything you've done as a person, all I found out was you're Canadian, you're going to be taken over by us. Or are you mad at us? Are you mad? Like that kind of attitude, suddenly we're diehard. Suddenly we're like, you mess with us, elbows up, you get the hockey
like threat response, right?
Yeah, I mean, like exactly. Like we're like, fine. You want this smoke? we'll go down. We're 35 million people, but we'll go down fighting. Like, we're tough. And suddenly the unity is, this is our unifying piece, is we're all going to experience this from the same perspective of a threat. Now, I can tell you right now that there's a group of Indigenous that are like, doesn't feel so nice now, does it? So I get it. And I get that. I get that. So we need to do better and we need to be better. But what I don't want to do, and I feel like, when people say like, you got bullied growing up, and then they say you should be thankful that that happened to you because it made
you stronger. Yeah.
Well, that's not this, because we should not have needed this kind of threat and this kind of bullying, again, not from everyone, not even but from people in power, in order to suddenly feel like who we are is valid to everyone else. I hope it makes us reflect on the fact that we cannot be that. We cannot continue down the line of thinking that we would be homogenous with someone who thinks that way. I hope that anyone that goes, I would actually be fine there, I would be accepted there, they take a second to think why not everyone would be, and really reflect on what that privilege means. I would really hope that. It's not necessarily what's happening. I know a lot of people that have insurance through their company. They have all of these things covered that we would say are benefits from being here versus there. And they say, you know what? I could work in the US. They're just like me. And it's like, well, yeah, you're white and you're a man and you are young and handsome and have insurance and you have all of these things going for you. You have a job, you have this. So you have not paid attention to why people are upset. And I think that's what all of us need to do a little bit more. I think when we ask each other who benefits from this, to your point, like literal criminals that are just able to walk, like, I can't imagine what it feels like to people. And maybe I can, to a degree, of like why I was so upset when Hillary didn't win. Like, again, I want better for that role. I think this bipartisan thing is really interesting to me because I'm Canadian. So if I say something like Trump sucks, they'll turn around and be like, well, Biden. And I was like, that's so funny that you think that automatically I must be pro this. Like, everyone just needs to be way better, real fast. But what I can tell you is I also understand context and I understand nuance to the fact that you cannot tell me both sides. Do I think that Kamala represented everything? We're further left, and I wouldn't say everyone represents how far left I am here.
Yeah.
Like, I think in the perspective of US politics, maybe the closest, and I'm not saying all, is Bernie and AOC right now. I mean, and that's like Kamala was pro-gun. I'm pro-rights if it's really, 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 really hard, because I can't completely abolish it. But I'm not okay with that. And I'm sure some of the Palestine-Israel kind of discussions also were very divisive for people. But all I saw was somebody who wanted to remove your ability to challenge when someone was in power for that to happen. That's what I saw. I saw that they weren't equal. I see that with our government, of course, that there's layers. There's better representation of me. There's recognizing there are a lot of people right of me or conservative of where I stand, which means they need representation too. I get that. But also, it's like, I understand what gender identity is and how important it is for the individual. What I don't understand is why it would ever go to law or into policies. That's what I don't understand. Because unless you're telling me that laws and policies address people differently based on their gender, then I don't know why it's there. So there are conversations that I understand from a level of person to person that I can tell you, like the amount of times I hear like, oh, I'm, liberal in social issues, but I'm
fiscally conservative.
Oh
fiscally
my
conservative.
God.
Yeah.
If I hear that one more time about people who have not represented your fiscal responsibility, Like, they have not protected your anything fiscally on your end. So where that conversation happens, to me, and I've said this before, to me, you are telling me what you're willing to tolerate. And today, in the world that I live in, I know it's a privilege to say, but if you choose money, and I know that means survival, and I know that means safety, and I know it means so many more things. But if someone has told you that not only may or may not the money come, but everyone else who does not look like you, and maybe you, because they eat your face too, you just might be last. That's the problem. We are not them. We are not the people they're protecting. We're not. The people that are getting the jobs. Do you think when someone goes, well, he can't be sexist because Linda McMahon is the representation? Like, what does that even mean? Because that's like when people say they don't believe in DEI, but all they know about of DEI is someone who went, let me just tick the boxes and get Black, disabled, veteran, and all in one so that you guys, so I don't have to deal with this any longer, and never understood the importance of various voices and personalities and perspectives and everything that comes with the beauty of what DEI is. And then suddenly you do have an argument against it because you think that that makes him a feminist.
Yeah, and it's a maddening situation from our perspective. You see the people that are being appointed, and it's just like negative amount of qualifications. And, and then, of course, I think there was one example of a general who was kind of relieved of his duties, Black man, and incredibly decorated, and he was replaced by somebody, a white man, who is incredibly not as decorated. Yeah. And you're like, oh, this is why these policies need to be in place, because there's this favoritism and getting your people in, quote unquote, and just using that sort of kind of these corporate structures that have been in place at Trump's businesses since the 80s, and now it's infiltrated our government. I do want to close this on the anthem, which is what we started on, and really get your take on whether they should even play these anthems anymore at all. And it's always been interesting to me because friends of mine in Europe, when I tell them about American sports, they're just kind of like, wow, it's kind of weird that in a club match they would play a national anthem. Yeah. And I was like, yeah, that is weird. And then, you look at players who've had their careers derailed, Colin Kaepernick, the most recent example, Mahmoud Abdul-Rauf back in the 90s with the NBA as another example. But at the same time, it's given Canadians a platform to protest, right, at sporting events. So where do you come out on if the anthems in this case, both American and Canadian, should be played at sporting events if it's non-international competition?
It's interesting because, like, on one hand, I value my own opinion. On the other, I'm not sure it matters. Like, in the sense of, like, I'm not going to make any changes. If from my perspective, something like the Four Nations, and I said this when it came to booing too, I get that. You are representing a country. You are representing the country that's being that's having the problem, and that is, let's say, causing the problem, however you want to say. I also a big tennis fan. I've seen not shaking the hand of a Russian player when they're Ukrainian. Like, I've seen this, and I get it. I think you have to understand that what is personal to me, what I would do, is not the same of why I get it. Like, as in, I wouldn't do that myself personally, but I get it. And it's not my place to say you should not be doing this. So I believe that if you have an anthem, you put an anthem out there to be subject to how people address it when it's happening. I believe that. So our anthem is French and English. We try to have a representation of both. But I do believe so the other thing with our anthem that I don't know who knows this or whatever, we also made modifications to our anthem because we had all of our men was the statement, and then we said in all of us. So we made it more inclusive. This is in the last 10, 15 years, right? So we have been slightly more flexible with our representation through our anthem. Because we're able to be a little bit more flexible means we can maybe get with the times. We're not fully with the times, don't get me wrong. I would almost invite that into, it's sort of like the conversation about statues. Remember when they were getting taken down and like everything like that, right? If you were open to a statue that was reevaluated every 5 years or something, because maybe it's like a corrosive piece of material or something like that, that enables you to revise, no problem, because historically we can still be better. If you have an anthem, if you have commandments, if you have things that are not flexible to the times, not willing to take a hit, like a flag, like things like that, there are people that are being condemned for wearing a flag, and then there's MAGA. There are people who, the standards are changing across the board. If you want to throw out that the standards of how you address the anthem are always be respectful, then you have to make sure everyone takes their hat off. Then you have to make sure nobody's talking during it. These things, they escalate. So all of a sudden booing is bad when there's an actual stronger message than what the anthem was doing. I have to say, I have to believe that if you are going to put the anthem out there, you have to know it's subject to that. I have seen people butcher the US anthem. And yet booing it is the problem, especially for a good cause. Taking a knee when that conversation was insane to me. A veteran suggested it as a form of demonstration. And we all knew what it was. And if we were paying attention, we wanted to get down and do the same. Do I think that they should have cut out the anthem because of that? Maybe, because it's not representing the people the way it's supposed to. But do we open that as a conversation of, should the flag be at Parliament, or should they be at the government? Should we allow other flags? Like, because I know that conversation was happening on in certain military places where they just made a rule that no other flags beyond. These conversations only become necessary with the weight we put behind them. I could play the anthem today in a grocery store and people do not have to stop. There's no mandatory you have to behave a certain way. And because of that, if you are against booing with a justified reason, then all you can do is say, maybe the anthem doesn't represent what we thought it did. And I think that's the conversation that's more important than should it happen. Like it does blow my mind that, Ovechkin, Russian, does that represent, and very supportive of Russia, or at least of Putin. Should he have to stand for an anthem he clearly doesn't represent or care about? Should he have to? Maybe that's like, where's the line? Because to your point, when they're representing their team, a national identity, and you've signed up for this. You're saying, I'm representing Canada, have an anthem. But if Provorov couldn't support Pride Night as the Flyers, why is he going to support Veterans Night of American veterans? Why is he expected to, because the arguments are always there when they're like, well, it's against my religion. Well, I'm pretty sure that it's going to be against your religion, someone's religion, to hockey fights cancer, because they're not into medical intervention. Like, where's the line of where it's actually acceptable that someone has to stand for all of these causes? Because you've determined they can step down if it's LGBTQ+. But apparently veterans, no, but you're also cool with cutting all of their rights or all of their the money put into Social Security for them and for their, like, I work with these programs, like they're being cut. I know this.
Yep.
So again, we're talking about an anthem. The veterans aren't being supported. They're homeless. Like, they're out in the streets. You've forgotten what you represent anyway. And yet you're up in arms over an anthem. So to answer your question very directly, no, it should not be at a place that people have not signed up to represent what that anthem may or may not mean, which is when you're going for your national team, personally.
So while you were saying that, I just had like this idea, because I feel that the United States national anthem has been incredibly politically weaponized since 9/11. Is probably the time frame I would say. So these last 24 years, 25 years. If you're in the city, why not just create a quote unquote anthem for that team? And so like I'll use like, if you have like a local Philadelphia musician, to use the Flyers example, why wouldn't you commission that person? It's like, hey, when you're at the Flyers home games, they're going to play this and the crowd's going to be into it because it's the official song and anthem of the Flyers. To me, that feels a lot better than just, because to your point, there have been countless musicians or performers that have absolutely wrecked the national anthem. And it's just like, no one, I don't know, maybe this is just me from my political lens of like, no one actually likes to hear it. Like, I'm not like, oh man, this is my fucking jam. Fucking put it up, put the volume up to 10. Like, no, that's not the case. And I maybe some people, they wake up in the morning, it's the national anthem playing, and they're super patriots, and can't relate. But it is something that I think needs to be reevaluated. What is the real point of this kind of, I would call it forced patriotism? We see it across all sports. We see it in football, we see it in hockey, we see it in basketball. It doesn't matter. It's everywhere, right? But Kalli, I expect most of my conversations here to be about 45 minutes, and you just kept giving me a wealth of knowledge and information, and I really truly appreciate it. Appreciate you taking the time to do so.
Thanks.
So follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Kalli, thank you once again for joining me, and for everybody listening, thank you for tuning into another episode, and we will see you next time on the Deep Cover Podcast.
Thanks for having me.